I will comment the paragraph 11 of the introduction of the Encyclopedia. Spirit is consciousness at the first level, immediate sensuous consciousness. And the objects of spirit are feelings, which are inner determinations or emotions. I am affected emotionally. I have feelings and emotions. Intuitions, which are spatially and temporally determined object. I have the intuition of this book. It is immediately present. Perceptions, etc. And then images. I can think of a tree, an orange, the sea, whatever I can project in my mind. Images, representations, goals, purposes, aims. I can envision a motive for my action. My purpose by making this video is to help you understand the 11th paragraph of the introduction of the Encyclopedia. But, so this is every individual in this sense is spirit, strictly speaking, because every living and conscious human has feelings, intuitions, images, representations, goals, purposes, etc., etc. But spirit opposes himself to these forms of apprehending the same content I made in my previous videos that you can watch on the playlist Encyclopedia. The idea that it's not the idea, it's that there is only one being. There is only one content, which is God. We are living within God, so to speak. So we can transform, I can transform these forms of apprehending the one content, my feelings, my emotions, the perceptions, etc., into thought by negating what is immediately given and retracting within myself, within my inner intellectual consciousness, which is the highest interiority, which is thought, and I can think about myself not as a perceiving, sensuous, purposeful being, but as a pure thought. And this is how spirit comes back into itself. I can think about what I am, not as an empirical individual, not my empirical characteristics, but what I am as a thinking entity. And Hegel says, thought makes for itself, becomes its own object, so thought thinks itself, and this is the self-knowledge of thought, and logic is the thought of thought. So if I ask myself, what am I as a transcendental ego, to use the language of Kant, what am I as a thinking entity, as a spirit, I will have to study logic to answer this question. When I say I am, I is the subject, which is self-consciousness, which is thought. And when I say am, from the verb to be, it is being. So when I say I am, we have the unity of thought and being. So Hegel says, seine unvermischte Selbstheit ist das Denken. It's unmixed, unmiscegenated, one could say, self is a self which is pure from all mixtures, all impurities, one could say. So when you understand the obsession of the German philosophers with conceptual purity, you can deduce that a couple of centuries later, National Socialist Germany, they were just German philosophers gone wrong, so to speak. But it is in the very process of German philosophy to go wrong at some moment. So, yeah. But and something that it took me a long time to understand is that when I say I am, it is not me the empirical individual that you see with my features, my face, my story, my psychology. It is consciousness becoming aware of itself. And God is being. When I say I am, I try to abstract from all the empirical determinations and to elevate myself in the realm of pure thought. I am. I become God. And that's why every humans are made in the image of God, because whenever a human being says I am and elevates himself in the realm of pure thought, he identifies with God. But God is not just I am, because this thought is contradictory and brings about an entire process of development which tries to solve the contradiction, because being is nothing, so it's dialectical. I've made videos about the beginning of the logic of being, so if you are interested, check the videos. But so yeah, thought stumbles into contradictions out of its own inner structure, so to speak, and loses itself in the non-identity of determined thoughts, so cannot grasp itself, but stumble into its opposites. So thought and being are contradictory. That's why there is movement in the world, because the world is, so it's self-contradictory. That's why everything moves. That's why there are so many conflicts at various levels, because conflicts is a unity of opposite determinations which brings forth movement and the attempt to solve the conflict, to solve the contradiction. In the realm of physiology, if I am thirsty, I have a contradiction within me because I feel the negative within me, namely thirst, and I will be forced to move to try to seek water and to drink water to solve the contradiction. And this is the reason why in developed countries there are very highly complex systems of water distribution, because this is how men have attempted to solve the contradiction which is present in every human, namely that when he doesn't drink, he becomes thirsty. Yeah, that's an illustration. Yeah. So, thought, pure thought, which is God, tries to know what thought is and what being is, so tries to acquire self-knowledge, but thought stumbles into self-contradictory determinations. And this is what Kant, the transcendental ego of Kant, calls the antinomies of thought, the antinomies of the understanding. Namely, if I say the world, is it finite or infinite, I can, according to Kant, I can defend both contradictory position. The world is infinite in space, but also finite. It is infinitely extended in time, but also it has a beginning. Are we free or are we determined? We are free, but I can also say that we are determined. So these are the antinomies, because reason, according to Kant, can defend and argue in favor of two opposed contradictory determinations. But this is a self-contradictory process. And Hegel, the difference between Kant and Hegel, is that Hegel shows that the antinomies, namely the self-contradictory assertions of reason, are not only valid for time, space, the world, and freedom. Is the world infinite in time and in space? Does it have a cause, or is it random? Did the world appear randomly, or is there a cause of the world? Is there a purpose, etc.? And are we free or are we determined? Hegel says that these are four examples taken by Kant, but actually it applies for every concept. Every thought is contradictory for Hegel. This is what the logic shows. Yeah. And he says the nature of thought is dialectical. Der Verstand, the understanding, which is one-sided dualistic thinking, falls into the negative of itself, into contradictions. And I will illustrate. Der Verstand says being is being. Being is not nothing. there is being and there is nothing. But what is there in being? Then der Verstand says, an object. No, that's not being, that's an object. It's determined, it has properties, limit, it has a quality, etc. What is there in pure being? And then der Verstand tries to seek determinations which might say what pure being is, but actually reason says there is nothing in pure being. No determination, nothing to see, nothing to touch, nothing to speak about it. There is nothing. So pure being is nothing, is pure nothing. So that's how the dialectic begins, so to speak, that pure being is pure nothing. But if it is nothing, it is the opposite of itself, so it's contradictory, and this is what brings forth the logical and ontological and theological movement. That's the first example of dialectics. Another example, more determined. What is something? Der Verstand says something is something. It is not something else. It is identical to itself and different from something else. But then reason says, but something, what is it? Something is limited. It has a limit. It is finite. It has a determinacy, a Bestimmtheit, and it is in opposition, so to speak, with something else. Something is what it is, namely something, to the extent that it is not something else. So it means that something else is kind of the boundary of something, so it is a moment of the being of something. Something and something else are in a conceptual unity, because something is only what it is to the extent that it is not what it is not, so it has its not being, which is something else, in its very concept. So that's why something and something else are conceptually one. More determined. Unity and multiplicity. Unity, Hegel says, is the completion of qualitative being. Unity is für sich sein, namely being, which is in relation to itself and exclude the other from itself, so it is one. It is one with itself. But it contains the negative within itself, so it is relation to self, but a negative relation to self. So there is a repulsive movement by separating unity from itself, which brings about multiplicity, the many. But the many, they are all one, so they are different from the one. This is what brings about repulsion. But they are in relation to one another, which is attraction. So the many becomes one. And in qualitative being, the determinacy is one with being. If you change the determinacy, you change the being ceases to be what it is. But in the passage from unity to multiplicity, the determinacy becomes indifferent to being, and this is how quality turns into quantity. That's the dialectical movement which extracts, so to speak, quantity out of quality. Final example, identity and difference. Der Verstand says identity is identity, difference is difference. But reason says identity is relation to self. I am myself. This is my identity. But when I say this, I have self-consciousness, relation of self with myself. So this relation means that there is already a distinction, a difference. Identity cannot be thought of without difference, because it is relation to self. And the entire process of Die Wissenschaft der Logik is the unfolding of the various contradictions and the attempt to solve the contradiction, to find peace, basically. Logical rest, because the movement is restless. It is always on the move, always evolving, always developing, and it is always trying to solve the contradiction. Okay, yeah. And Hegel says that thought despairs. There is despair in pure thought because it cannot find a fixed identity, so to speak, a fixed and stable identity of what thought is. So that's how thought regresses into the more primitive modes of being, or the more primitive forms of apprehending being, namely belief, faith, atheism, skepticism, feeling, etc., etc. So in this paragraph, it is explained why there are atheists, there are skeptics, there are believers, there are people who have a strong faith, but no one knows God, and everyone is debating about God because God is thought, is the thought of being, and being and thought are in contradiction with one another. So people believe that philosophy is just nonsense. It's just a waste of time. It's abstractions. But the problems that people encounter in the real world, what people call problems, conflicts, and problems of all sorts, they are just the reflection in the realm of ontology, namely in what is, in being, in the world, of intellectual, cognitive conflicts within pure reason. The world is the image of the mind of God, and there are conceptual conflicts within the mind of God, and that's why there are conflicts, psychological, economic, political, geopolitical, religious, of all sorts in the world, because the world is just the manifestation of the mind of God. So yeah, to conclude about this paragraph, Hegel, so to speak, is not happy with Kant. He's not satisfied because Kant took 4 antinomies: is the world, the age of the world, the spatial determination of the world, the cause of the world. Is it did the world popped out of nothing randomly? That's a question that today's physicists ask themselves, but that's a metaphysical question. And do we have a free will, or is everything predetermined? So these 4 questions for Kant, Hegel says that these are concrete objects, but Kant did not see that these conflicts, namely that one can attribute and predicate 2 opposed determinations to various objects, this process is the very movement of reason itself, the highest faculty of thinking, because every concept in the sphere of being, essence, and the concept itself is self-contradictory. And this is what brings about the movement and the change and the development. And yeah. I try to make very complex ideas in the ordinary sense intelligible. If you pick out, after having watched my videos, if you pick out Die Kritik der reinen Vernunft or this book in English or German or whatever language, you will understand a lot more clearly. I try to make these things intelligible. And it's very difficult because what this paragraph says is that the mind of God is conflicted. Reason struggles to understand itself. So, yeah.